I'll use a generic word. It's a little reassuring, because it's recognizable as a generic word. It's not a $20 psychiatrist diagnosis. It's just a word from a deaf poet from Pittsburgh living in Tacoma. When the psychopaths who poisoned Mackenzie Shirilla poisoned me, they have structured their authoritarian administration so that I was unable in any way to get them addressed either legally or even through the courtesy of student advocacy. So I know something about the horrifying misjudgment and abandonment to which that poor Mackenzie Shirilla is totally subjectioned without presently any reassurance of review. Well, they also had me under psychiatric care, so it's easy to see, without knowing too much, what they are probably saying behind closed doors. Yes, we poisoned Mac in the mouth. Yes, we used a neurohypnotic nerve agent on him. And yes, the whole thing was authored by someone named Mackenzie working with Andelman in the Cleveland Wealth, network. But they will mumble just because the presentation of Mackenzie's issue comes at him through a hybrid medium like TikTok doesn't mean that all of the signals being sent to him are deliberate. That's the notion of a schizophrenic mind. And the somnambulant spirits of John Lennon and Yoko Ono begin to wail. No, Mackenzie is not the walrus. No, Mackenzie is not the walrus. And they start taking digs at me. See, if you go through his Twitter, you'll see he makes cryptic remarks that are, in his mind, related. Okay, so they expect me to pause and say, I'm asking you to differentiate between the two things. Instead, what I'm going to do is pause and say it is possible to differentiate between the two things. Why do I question whether it's advisable to ignore all the hybrid signals? I'll give you one good example. One of the people who put a little text notation over a presentation about Mackenzie in TikTok used the recurrent D on the text. The only time I have ever seen that, and this was before I began to send Ohio State Board of Corrections my research concerns, was when Gail Burston did that in a letter to me. She's the one who shows the neurohypnotic chemical that induced the extreme situation that sounds so much like what Mackenzie went through. So their text message is hybrid, related to the text documents that show a prison psychiatrist was manufacturing the Shaviti neurochemical to induce extreme situations. See? So in other words, the message with Gail Burston came over TikTok at me. And I noted that fact amidst a number of other facts. So I I have experience with these communities and the way that they spin their beanies. See that up there? Woo, woo, woo. They see Mackenzie and I as expendable white. And believe me, some of these people are like Noam Chomsky. They're white themselves. And, the derisiveness about double standards, for example, plays into confirmatory bias loop-de-doop. I'll give you an example of this. There was this guy, there was some scene broke out while I was working at the community college library. And when they quieted him down, I asked, "What's this about?" He said he believed you were ignoring him. I was like, "We were telling him that you were deaf." He was like ignoring the black man. He was not deaf. I didn't know he was there. I'm deaf. He was talking to me from behind me. Well, in the loop-de-doop, it does not matter that you would have immediately put down what you were doing and attended to his concerns or questions as a client coming to the library desk for information and direction. What matters is the long legacy of whites ignoring the black man. And you are honorary the representative of the whites ignoring the black man. Honorary the representative. So Mackenzie Shirilla is honorary, like the line through her head is because, they took a hostage to scalp him. Who cares, right? And this is the Spinner Beanie Network that runs the administration of psychological services in South mental health, who poisoned me in the mouth, for example. They use poison shamelessly. I've said that many times. Now, it's possible to differentiate between the hybrid situation. I don't believe it's absolutely advisable to ignore the hybrid situation. But there is a difference in questioning whether these hallucinogens that were perfectly straightforwardly used on Mackenzie were properly traced in terms of the people in her cultural milieu. I know what happens is that peers scatter. She was shamelessly abandoned by all of her peers. People ask me, what if it was you? I would say, look, I'm not going to get a girl who's had extreme psychedelic incidents on drugs in a car situation to begin with for her safety. In other words, those people who were in the car with her were complicit in the accident that nearly killed her. I'm not saying that they knowingly gave her the Shaviti chemicals, but they were complicit. I'm absolutely sure that they knew about. One of them was dating her and passionately involved with her, and instead, the family's victims disgracefully abandoned someone who did not intend to kill them. That's not what happened. She was surmounted by neurohypnosis. The name Mackenzie is an index in these people's game theory. That's what's going on in this situation. I think people should take a note to remember that it's not a question of whether you can differentiate between the hybrid stuff that I referred to and the absolute conclusive proof that the territorial regime that has her in custody has experimented on minors shamelessly, without review, without investigation, and with a lot of double talk, using these extreme neurohypnotic chemicals that they invented, intending to create near fatal circumstances where the mind survives and the victim thinks the mind saved them. She thought she was Supergirl. You see the same thing in the horrifying, gut-wrenching thing I wrote after they did it to me when I was 14. Mackenzie seems to have engaged in escape behavior. There's no review of what these people did. There's no review of the territorial administration that is at work in that neurohypnotic experiment network. And it does seem to me that trying Mackenzie as an adult, when those things demolish your psychological development defenses. I mean, you're just a vegetable practically after that. Was to protect the administration by making it look to be more her fault than it could possibly be construed as having been. And the same is true with the idea of saying that I jumble hybrid signals with the factual details of that regime. It's a way of lending credibility and defense to the administration who did it. What I call upon the Strongsville Police Department to really seriously consider doing is talking to the people who knew where the drugs came from. And find out which of the people who are responsible for these hallucinogens are working out of Pittsburgh. Because the University of Pittsburgh has a long-standing goat boy. They call me a goat, scapegoat. They said things to me like, we're not sorry for anything we did, only that it had to be you. That was Steve Langer. Thomas Gordon called me a convenient thing to hate. These people just pick somebody. They just picked Mackenzie Shirella because she was vulnerable. She was susceptible. She was like a sacrificial animal. And in my humble opinion, the three of those victims, nearly all of whom nearly died, one of them survived, were victims more of a car bomb than attempted homicide. I think it takes a great deal of artifice in structuring what they presented as a case against her as scientific evidence. I mean, I'm not good at science, but that takes a great deal of artifice.